for the scoring and sound managers, um, I use the command pattern. So let me just pull this up. So for the score manager, but controller, whatever. So score controller, I store all of the score values for all of the critters and entities and whatnot. Um, the factories then get their score values through score commands. So let me pull up the flea. Okay. So the flea has a pointer to score command score. Uh, when the factory is created, it asks the score controller for a command score that corresponds to the flea. Um, okay. And then the score command will be used later by the factory to update the score. Um, so that happens when report death is called. This is when the player kills the flea by some means. Um, so when the enemy dies, it calls report death, which will then send the score command back to the score manager. So just one thing to, so it sends it back to the score manager. Let's go back here. So that will call send score command, pushes it onto the command stack, and then immediately process the score. I'll call execute, which will then call update current score, and that will do exactly that. It'll update the current score. So yeah, that's the basics of the command pattern. The spider does something a little different because it's because its score is based on its distance from the player. So the spider actually has three score commands, each one for each score associated with distance, and then the spider factory, when report death is called, it will decide itself which one it'll call, and then it'll pass the appropriate one back to the score manager. Sound manager works pretty much the same way. It gives a sound command to the factories. The factories then process that score accordingly. We'll pass that back to the sound manager accordingly. The only difference is when the sound command is sent. Like for example, I send the sound command right when I create an instance of a critter, and then also thing that's different, I'll send a sound end command basically to stop that sound when there are no more instances of that critter on the in the window. So that's when there's no more actives after the count is less than one, and that mean then it sends the end sound command, which ends the sound. Also in the sound manager, I make use of the um, strategy system. Yeah, strategy system, strategy pattern. To toggle between playing sound and muting the sound. So, yes, this is Sound Manager. So instead of just playing this down right off the bat, I'll get my current sound mode that I'm using. So sound modes. So both of those. So my the two sound modes I have is silent mode and audible mode, both derived from sound mode class. Override those. So if I'm in audible mode, I'll just play the sound. If not, I will just use the default. Oh no, I will just do nothing if I'm in silent mode. And yeah, sound manager. So yeah, that's what that does. Okay. All right, I'm gonna go on to the HUD now. So the HUD is in charge of managing and updating the text on the screen. It's a singleton. It also stores a vector of the high scores. Yeah. So when it's initialized, it builds all the default texts. Whenever there's a change, let's say, for example, the score is updated, the HUD then updates the corresponding text. In this case, it would be score. So just putting that into an example. So say the score is updated. It'll actually go to the player. Where's the player? Here's the player. So player, update the score. The player will then make a call to the HUD and pass it its current score. The HUD will then take that score, add the appropriate amount of trailing zeros or leading zeros, whatever it is, trailing, leading, to that score, and then pass this string into the actual text. And what that will do is go into text, update text. Text is an object that stores a list. Is it a list or a vector? It's a list. Yeah, it's a list. List of glyphs, which are the things that actually, the characters that actually appear on screen. So update text, it takes the new string, this case being the new score. It'll basically just clear out all the existing glyphs and then just rebuild the string. Obviously this is not the best way to do it, but I don't know, time constraints. What else? So yeah, that's how it updates the text. So moving on to high scores, back to the HUD. So yes, the HUD stores the high scores. High scores are actually an object that I created. I stored them in management, score, high score. So yeah, these are just objects that hold a score, which is the actual score value, the name, which is the initials, and the vector, but this doesn't really do anything. That was when I was doing something else, with the high scores. So yeah, the important thing is it has the score and a name. And then what the HUD will do is when the HUD is created, it'll just create dummy values for the high score list. whenever the player gets a game over, an object called a, let me pull that up. So as I mentioned in a previous video, um, player manager handles lives, so I also made it handle the game over state. So where is it? No, that's okay. Here it is. So when the player gets a game over, it'll first display the game over text. It'll then create a name input. All this object does is it grabs the key inputs from the player. After the third input, it takes that, it sends it to, it stores it inside of a high score with the player's current score, and then it just deletes itself. Yeah, it just deletes itself. So, going back to the HUD, just string. Yeah, okay, so this is where it gets the name from the name input, and it gets a score from the player manager, the current player, and it creates a new, if it places on the high score list, then it'll create a new high score, and then it will pop the last score off, the lowest score off of the high score list, so it stays at 7 high scores. So yeah, that's high score. So I think the last thing I need to talk about is attractor mode, the scenes. So I have two scenes. I have attractor scene and first scene. Attractor scene is just attractor mode. First scene is the actual game. Attractor mode, it starts in attractor mode. It's its own scene. It has its own HUD initialization, which it builds the dummy values for the high score, and it also displays them right off the bat. It also creates an AI player, and it also creates an scene input object. This is basically just like the name input. It's just an object that waits for a key pressed. When it gets a key press, it'll change the scene and deletes itself. And when it changes the scene, it terminates the current scene. So yeah, when it terminates the scene, it terminates all of the singletons, and then goes into the actual game. And then when there's a game over in the actual game, it'll just go back into the attractor scene. And yeah, that's all the Centipede. Yeah.